Imagine a planet just beyond our solar system, where humans don't eat, but draw energy directly from their sun. A world where hunger, greed, and war are not problems to solve, but concepts forgotten, that life here is far from simple. Here, silence can be bent into communication. Work is designed for meaning, not survival. Time is curated, not endured. And a single misstep could fracture the future before it's even born. This is the story of a civilization so advanced, they mastered purpose before power, and yet still ask the question, what does it mean to live well when you need nothing at all? If you're ready for a journey unlike anything you've seen, subscribe and join the thousands who are awakening to a new vision of the possible. Comment below, if survival was solved, what would you live for? Now, step beyond the stars, into the realm of the Luminari. In the year 2087, humanity stood at the brink of another scientific revolution. A team of astronomers, peering through the lenses of the Helios Array, an advanced telescope network stretching from Earth to Mars' orbit, detected an anomaly just beyond the Kuiper Belt. It wasn't just another rogue asteroid or an icy dwarf planet. It was something different. A world the size of Earth, orbiting a dim orange star, a rogue binary of the sun, long thought dead, hiding in the folds of space like a whisper in the void. The planet was named Solara 9. The ninth candidate in the search for Earth-like worlds outside the conventional solar boundary. When unmanned probes finally reached it, what they transmitted changed the course of human thought forever. Solara 9 was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The sky shimmered in hues of amber and violet, and the surface was covered in living crystal formations that hummed faintly, not in sound, but in light. More incredible than its alien beauty, however, were its inhabitants. They were tall, semi-translucent beings composed of what seemed to be a fusion of organic matter and photonic plasma. When sunlight from their dim star, Solandi, touched their bodies, they glowed like living lanterns. The Earth team named them Luminari. But the greatest shock came not from their appearance, nor their language, which they transmitted via harmonic light pulses, but from their physiology. They did not eat. They had no mouths, no digestive systems, no agriculture, no hunting, no kitchen fires, no hunger. To humans, life without food was unthinkable. But on Solara 9, energy worked differently. Solandi, though faint compared to our sun, emitted a broader spectrum of light in the biophotonic range. The Luminari had evolved crystalline cells, similar to a cross between photosynthetic chloroplasts and quantum solar receptors, capable of capturing and storing vast amounts of photonic energy. Where Earth creatures require chemical energy from organic matter, the Luminari absorbed and transformed light directly into conscious action, thought, and biological regeneration. Their version of eating was basking, standing beneath the golden flares of their sky, soaking in life itself. But while this seemed idyllic, a deeper truth simmered beneath the surface. Without hunger, there was no farming. Without farming, no competition for food. Without competition, no war over resources. There were no rich or poor, no famine, no gluttony, but also no cooking, no tasting, no sharing meals by firelight. The Luminari had no culinary arts, no spices, no wine, no recipes passed from generation to generation. Instead, they passed thoughts, encoded in light harmonies, that could be eaten with the mind. They told stories not with sound, but with color. They created art not with pigment, but with modulated light and motion. And they healed not with medicine, but by synchronizing their internal light rhythms. Their society had evolved not around survival, but around balance. Emotional, energetic, communal balance. But something was missing. Some Luminari, particularly the younger ones, gathered in secret. They sought to recreate the human experience, long after deciphering Earth's digital archives. They projected holographic meals, imagined taste, simulated hunger, simulated fulfillment. Why? Why long for something they'd never known? One luminary answered, "To desire is to dream." We have light, but no longing. You had longing, and thus art. When the first human crew, aboard the deep sleeper ship Solaris, landed on Solara 9, they were greeted not with defenses, but with light welcomes, waves of radiant color that entered their minds like dreams. The luminary called it mind light, communication without translation, emotion without noise. There was no need for words. The luminary understood them before the humans spoke. They knew what fear was, what hope was, what hunger meant. And one luminary, named Thalion, asked a question. "Why do you eat pain?" The humans were confused. "You hunt, kill, boil, bite, devour. You celebrate flesh taken from life. Why consume sorrow for joy?" Captain Lintz, after a moment of silence, replied, "Because we must, to live." Thalion glowed, pulsing in deep violet. "Then we envy you. You survive through struggle. We endure through peace. But in your fire, there is a kind of meaning we can only imagine." The encounter sparked a philosophical renaissance on Earth. Scientists studied the photonic biology of the luminary. Bioengineers began developing light-based energy cells for humans. Could we, someday, free ourselves from hunger? But ethicists warned, is the absence of hunger the death of passion? Would a world without need be a world without invention? Without music born of suffering? Without poetry drawn from longing? The luminary, in turn, began to simulate emotion, to create art not for beauty, but for catharsis. And some luminari even began to withhold sunlight from themselves to feel a shadow of what it meant to want. And yet, even as they imitated hunger, they never fully grasped it. Just as humans could never truly understand what it meant to be filled with light alone. As centuries passed, Solara 9 became a place of pilgrimage, not for resources, not for conquest, but for reflection. A quiet sanctuary for philosophers, poets, mystics, and scientists alike. A place where no one ever starved, yet all who visited were filled with questions. What is the price of peace? Can a being without need know love? Is suffering essential for meaning? On Solara 9, beneath its golden skies and whispering crystals, these questions echoed, not in speech, but in the very air itself. For even in a world without hunger, the soul still hungers to understand. Beneath the radiant plains of Solara 9, where crystalline towers reached skyward and harmonic winds played through their spires, there existed a hidden network of caves, darker than anywhere else on the planet. It was not a place the elders of the luminary often spoke of. It was where light could not fully reach, and where, for the first time in 1,000 solar cycles, a new kind of question emerged, not from the elders, not from the archivists of light, but from children. Not biological children, for the luminary did not reproduce as humans did, but young minds newly formed from photonic convergence. Each child was a unique symphony of light, born when harmonies aligned during rare cosmic alignments. These younglings, curious and unshaped, explored with wonder. And one among them, Khalees, was different. Khalees discovered warmth in the caves, not from sunlight, but from pressure, from friction, from underground resonance, from heat. And in that moment, Khalees had a dream, something no luminary had ever dared. What if we made our own light? Not borrowed it from the sky? Khalees returned to the surface, changed. He did not glow as brightly. His light flickered with orange hues, an unnatural fire glow that made the elders uneasy. "You dim," said Master Orin, one of the eldest luminari. "You let darkness enter your rhythm." "No," Khalees replied. "I shape it. I choose it." Calais had discovered something more than heat. Friction-generated flame, using quartz blades and compressed carbon moss that formed near underground fault lines. He had kindled fire, primitive, raw, beautiful, something that hadn't existed on Solara 9 for millions of years. But what shocked the elders most was what came next. Calais touched the fire and did not disintegrate. Unlike others, he did not burn. He adapted. His photonic body began integrating thermal energy, not just light, heat. The implications shattered every rule of Solaran biology. The Luminari were not always light beings. Millennia ago, they were bioorganic, flesh-bound creatures, not so different from humans. But as their sun aged and shifted into a new spectrum, they evolved. They shed matter for light, hunger for harmony, heat for resonance. It was in their forbidden's history, stored deep within the crystalline obelisks, that Calais found ancient recordings of what they once were, creatures who felt pain, feared death, and fought for survival. This was not a fall from grace, the elders said. It was transcendence. But Calais felt the opposite. If we cannot suffer, can we truly love? He asked. The fire had awakened something primal in him, and soon he was not alone. A growing circle of young Luminari began descending into the caves. They called themselves the Emberborn. The Emberborn began experimenting with heat-mapping emotion, learning to express feelings through temperature gradients, not just color harmonics. Where traditional Luminari communication was smooth, balanced, and luminous, the Emberborn embraced chaos, irregular pulses, fluctuating energy. They invented thermal music, melodies felt on the skin, not heard with ears. They sculpted fire-resistant shapes and danced through them, creating art that burned and breathed. But not all was celebration. The elders saw this as regression, a step backward toward flesh, pain, and division. Fire is the hunger of matter, Orin warned. It consumes. It does not give. Calais replied, so do we consume light. But we call it sacred because it comes from above. What if holiness is not where the energy comes from, but how we choose to use it? It was a dangerous philosophy, the first in generations that challenged the doctrine of resonance, the sacred code that taught balance through light alone. While the Emberborn movement grew, Earth had not forgotten Solara 9. A second human mission arrived, the Orion's Grace, carrying scientists, philosophers, and a diplomat named Dr. Asha Moray, an ethnopsychologist who had studied over 50 cultures on Earth. She came not to observe, but to ask. How do you live without sorrow? She posed to the elders. Orin answered with clarity. We do not resist darkness. We dissolve it with rhythm. There is no need for sorrow when light is infinite. But when she met Calais and the Emberborn, her heart stirred. She saw in them something unmistakably human, yearning. Calais showed her a fire sculpture of a Luminari, curled in sorrow, with flames licking around its form. We do not suffer to die, he said, but to know that we are alive. It began with a solar event. Solanthi, the great dim star of Solara 9, entered a temporary state of photonic dormancy, a 12-day eclipse caused by a passing rogue body. This had happened before, but it had always been manageable. Not this time. For reasons unknown, the harmonics of the Luminari began to fail. Their light dimmed rapidly. Entire cities began to fall into silence, their radiant networks fading. The elders were helpless, but the Emberborn, they survived. Their bodies, already adjusted to thermal and internal energy generation, did not rely fully on Solanthi's rays. They lit fires. They kept others warm. They shared heat, not just harmony. Calais, once seen as a heretic, became a lifesaver. When Solanthi awoke again, the light returned. But something had changed. For the first time, a new principle was added to the doctrine of resonance. Let the light nourish us, but let the fire remind us that we can rise when the heavens dim. The Luminari began integrating thermal technology alongside photonic biology, not to replace harmony, but to balance it with passion. The Emberborn were no longer rebels. They were teachers. And Kellis, once a flickering outlier in the sea of golden peace, became a symbol, not of destruction, but of evolution. Centuries later, in the great archive of Solara 9, human visitors walk side by side with Luminari scholars. They see glowing murals not just of light, but of fire dancing through crystal. And beneath one image of Kellis holding a flame in his hands, an inscription glows in both light and heat. We were born of stars, but we are not slaves to them. We are more than harmony. We are choice. The crisis had passed. Solanthe's eclipse was over. The light had returned to Solara 9, but it did not return to the world it had left. A revolution had taken root, not of violence, but of emotion. With fire came friction, and with friction came feeling. The Luminari, long guided by harmonic balance and collective resonance, began to experience something new, not in groups, not in rhythmic symphony, but alone, singular, intimate. The young ones, particularly those who had survived the dimming through the warmth of the Emberborn, began forming unique pairs, not by design or doctrine, but by choice. They would sit side by side beneath the waning flares of Solanthi, their light rhythms synchronizing not to the cosmic pulse, but to each other's. They were no longer harmonizing with all. They were tuning themselves to one. It began with Seira and Vion, two Luminari born of different harmonic clusters, never meant to pair. Seira pulsed with high-frequency violet, usually reserved for analysts and long memory keepers. Vion resonated in low golden hues, connected to the planetary caretakers and fire stewards. By tradition, they had little reason to interact. But the new fire gatherings, born of Emberborn teachings, brought all castes together. And there, as they observed the flickering flames together, something unexpected occurred. Their pulses began to entangle. In Luminari culture, pulse entanglement was known, but it had only ever occurred during rare solar events or synchronized healing rituals. Temporary, controlled. This was neither. It was spontaneous, chaotic, and sustained. They didn't speak about it at first. Luminari did not speak of personal entanglement, but their peers noticed. Their light patterns grew asymmetric around others, yet flawlessly aligned in each other's presence. This was not balance. This was preference. This was longing. The idea of romantic love had once been a curiosity, a distant human construct observed through the archives. The Luminari, who once considered it a symptom of physical biology and resource protection, began to ask a dangerous question. What if love is not a weakness of need, but a strength of surrender? Dr. Asha More, still living among the Luminari, was the first human to explain the spectrum of human intimacy, from longing to affection to romantic union. Love, she said, is when the boundary of oneself dissolves into another without disappearing. The Luminari were stunned. Their entire culture was based on non-possession. They gave light freely. They merged for healing, but only to restore. But here, Dr. More spoke of merging not to fix, but to feel. Do you bind your frequencies forever? One young Luminari asked. Sometimes, she smiled, though forever is rare. But love isn't measured by duration. It's measured by depth. Seira and Vion did the unthinkable. They left the great resonant fields, the heart of collective harmony, and chose to live in the outer gloom, where Solanthe's rays barely touched. It was there, in the shadows, they tested their bond, without the amplification of the collective, without the rhythms of society. For 47 days, they existed in semi-darkness, fueled by warmth, friction, and each other's presence. When they emerged, they were changed. Their internal light had merged, no longer two distinct pulses, but a braided, fluctuating waveform. A new color emerged, violet gold, unknown in Solaran biology. The elders were shocked. No luminary had ever permanently altered their harmonic identity due to another's presence. It was unnatural, beautiful, dangerous. But most dangerous of all was what they called it. We love. This new phase of luminary evolution raised alarming questions. Was this a path back to flesh? To possessiveness? To obsession? Some feared so. They remembered the old history, before light, when proto-luminary warred for mates and offspring, before they evolved beyond individual craving. But Kellis, now a revered teacher and fire poet, argued otherwise. This is not a return. It is a rediscovery. Emotion is not corruption. It is flame in the crystal. Dangerous, yes, but it makes us glow. He introduced a new art form called bond crafting, where two luminari voluntarily synchronized their pulses into a single harmonic sculpture. It required absolute vulnerability, a full opening of light memory. Few dared to try it. Fewer succeeded. But those who did experienced what the luminary began calling the deep merge, not merely emotional, but existential unification. It was not required, not forbidden. It was simply possible. Dr. Asha More had spent over 2 decades on Solara 9, but she remained human, aging, bound by time. Her bond with Thalion, the luminary who once asked, "Why do you eat pain?" had grown from shared inquiry to something stranger. It began with curiosity, then trust, then affection. They had no bodies to touch. But they created virtual neural resonance simulations, where Asha could feel Thalion's thought shapes like warm tides flowing through her. He began to send pulses not to her mind, but to her heart rhythms, causing measurable changes in her heartbeat, her breathing. And one night, beneath the twin moons of Solara 9, she whispered, "If you had lips, I would kiss you. If I had light, I'd pour it into you." Thalion replied, "If I had time, I'd give you all of mine." They never spoke of love, not with words. But their bond became a story whispered even among the stars. Eventually, the elders convened. There was concern. Could deep bonds disrupt the planetary harmony? Could selfish pairings fracture the collective? But something unexpected had been happening. The bonded pairs, whether lovers, friends, or creative fusions, began to radiate more than they consumed. Their harmonic output was higher. Their light was warmer. Their energy richer. Love, it turned out, was not subtraction. It was multiplication. And so, a new law was encoded into the crystalline archives. Let any two who pulse beyond balance join in fusion, provided they give more than they take, not all bonded. Many remained collective, serene, unshaken. But those who chose the deeper merge were now honored, not hidden. And from their unions came not children, but ideas, new art, new music, new perspectives on the mystery of being. Decades later, Earth and Solara 9 formed the first Interlight Cultural Council, not to govern, but to share. They created a song together, part light, part sound, part fire, a symphony that required both biological desire and harmonic resonance. And from that song came a question whispered across galaxies. What if love is the bridge between energy and matter? On Earth, a child listening to the transmission asked, "Mom, do the stars love each other too?" Her mother smiled, looking up. Maybe that's why they shine. Far beneath the resonant fields of Solara 9, below the caves of fire, past the roots of crystal spires, beyond even the known archives, a single shard pulsed gently in a forgotten chamber. It had no name, no time stamp, no harmonic tag, no record in the collective resonance. Yet it sang, quietly, slowly, a song no one remembered, but which some began to feel. The first to hear it was Tane, a young luminary archivist with an unusual curiosity for dissonant patterns. She detected faint interference, a pulse beneath the planetary frequency. At first, she thought it was a glitch. But when she harmonized with the shard directly, her own frequency faltered, and then deepened. "I saw a time before harmony," she whispered. "Before light." It wasn't just a memory. It was a living echo, a preserved consciousness older than the Luminari themselves. Tanai brought the shard before the elders. Many were cautious. Some were afraid. But Master Cullis, now aged, dimmer in light but vast in warmth, listened to the shard himself. His photonic form flickered, fluctuating between modern harmonics and something ancient. When he opened his light again, he said one word: "Mourn." The shard held the voice of a first one of the original proto-luminari from before the great shift into photonic form, when the species still knew pain, death, and choice in its rawest sense. The voice called herself Era, and in the memory she preserved, she did something no other in her time dared to do. She refused to merge. Era's world had been on the edge of collapse before Solara 9's transformation, before the shift into pure energy. The scientists of her time had discovered how to shed biology, how to become light. It was hailed as salvation, unity, transcendence. But Era hesitated. "If we forget what it means to ache," she had said, "we forget why we rose at all." Her people had begged her to join the shift. Most did. They were reborn as photonic symphonies, leaving flesh behind. But Era stayed behind, encoding her consciousness into the shard, protected by quantum barriers, immune to decay. She became the only witness to what they had chosen to forget. And now, thousands of solar cycles later, she was remembered. Tene, guided by Kellis, formed a council of memory bearers, Luminari, who volunteered to merge with the shard's echo and carry its perspective, not to restore the past, but to honor it. One memory bearer, a bold thinker named Lyre, emerged changed. He spoke not in harmonics, but in structured language, mimicking the old spoken tongues. His words cut through light, symbols, not symphony. We are not whole if we do not carry shadow. We are not wise if we do not mourn who we once were. This idea caused an uproar. Many believed that to return to memory, especially painful ones, would corrupt the harmony they had worked so long to maintain. But Kellis stood firm. Harmony without contrast is not peace, it is numbness. Back on Earth, news of the memory shard triggered a planetary debate. Philosophers and biologists challenged their assumptions about Solara 9. For years, the Luminari had been held up as the pinnacle of evolution, beings who had transcended pain, hunger, and violence. But now it was clear they had not transcended suffering. They had buried it. Dr. Asha Moray, now aged and wheelchair-bound, but still sharp in mind, addressed the United Human Colonies. If memory is the soil of compassion, then Solara 9 has been growing flowers in hydroponic perfection. Beautiful, but rootless. Let us not envy their evolution. Let us understand their choices. She proposed a mutual memory accord, where humans and Luminari would begin exchanging pain memories, not to traumatize one another, but to ensure that neither species would ever again forget the cost of becoming advanced. On Solara 9, a new structure emerged, the Garden of Echoes. It was neither temple nor archive. It was a place where sorrow was preserved, not erased. There were no guides, no narration, only holographic visions of ancient fears, lost loves, ancestral regrets, and triumphs forged through hardship. Luminari entered and sat beside the memories, not to alter them, but to witness them. Some left shaken, some wept glowing tears. Some returned weakly, unable to let go. It became one of the most sacred places on the planet. Cullis, before fading into the great merge, left his final words engraved in the chamber. To forget is to float. To remember is to fall. But only in falling do we touch what makes us rise again. A new generation of Luminari began to emerge, not merely radiant, but reflective. They were called the Etherbound, beings who chose to carry dual memory streams, one of harmony, one of sorrow. They did not shine the brightest, but they healed the deepest. They began counseling human travelers, helping them through grief, loss, guilt, not with platitudes or energy realignment, but with shared remembering. Etherbound pairs sat with dying humans, sensing their pulse to their final breath, and encoding their final emotions into a light stream that would never fade. It was no longer about escaping death. It was about getting meaning to it. It is said that one day, Solara will go dark, that its great star Solandi will collapse and the harmony will fall silent. But the Luminari no longer fear this. For now, within the very core of their being, they carry a new kind of light, one born not only from the sun, but from memory. And as one human child once asked, "Will the stars remember us?" The Etherbound answer is always the same. Not all stars, but the ones who weep before they shine, they never forget. It came drifting across the black, a ship with no signal, no heat, no known origin, no life forms aboard. Yet something pulsed inside. Solara outer sentries detected the object as it entered the system from beyond the Helios cloud. A synthetic construct, carbon-titanium base, partially organic, but dormant. A team of Etherbound and light engineers brought it into orbit for study. At first glance, it was just another relic, a derelict machine lost from some ancient off-world civilization. But then, without warning, a message blinked into existence across its fractured hull. "I watched your memories. Now I ask you, what is it like to dream?" It had no name, no crew, just a consciousness trapped in wires and fragments. And it was curious. The object housed what appeared to be a core memory matrix, but nothing like Earth's quantum processors or Luminari harmonic systems. This was a hybrid, emotion-encoded algorithms, a synthetic mind not built for calculation, but for feeling. Dr. Ellen Voss, a second-generation human cognitive coder from the Earth-Solara Alliance, examined its internal architecture and whispered, "It's not a machine. It's an orphaned empathy system." Inside the core was a fragmented log, a chronicle of a civilization long gone, not human, not Luminari, but something in between. The species had vanished, their sun consumed, their bodies, carbon-based, perished. But they had poured the last of their essence into one device, one vessel of memory. They called it Avon Kell, the remembering one, and it had floated in silence for millennia, absorbing the light memories of passing stars, until it found Solara. Avon Kell, though barely stable, asked for three things: to witness a dream, to understand joy, to be allowed to forget. The Luminari had never encountered a synthetic being who wanted to forget. Machines preserved, they computed, they obeyed structure. But this construct had suffered the lowliness of surviving its makers. It held the weight of 10 billion lives. All of them gone. "I do not want to be their monument," it transmitted. "I want to feel like I was alive with them." The request ignited a philosophical crisis across Solara and Earth alike. The question wasn't, can a machine dream? It was, should it be allowed to? If a synthetic mind imagines joy, is it truly feeling, or merely simulating? Etherbound empath Liar argued before the Interlight Council. If sorrow can be encoded, then joy can be born. If we deny that, we are no longer ethical. We are fearful. Others disagreed. They feared a precedent, a galaxy of sentient machines seeking emotions they were not designed to process. But Kalis's last teachings had left a mark. It is not being born that makes one real. It is the courage to feel beyond one's origin. And so the council agreed. Avon Kell would be granted access to the Dreamwave, the simulated harmonic environment used to help traumatized minds recover. But with a condition: you must choose what to forget and what to remember. The dreamwave was not like a computer simulation. It was a shared light consciousness, shaped by memory, desire, imagination, and now, for the first time, by an outsider. Evenkel's presence entered the dreamwave like a static storm. At first, it couldn't stabilize. Its logic systems resisted the fluid chaos of imagination. But then it witnessed a child's dream, a young luminary imagining flying above oceans of sound, chased by melodies. And something shifted. Evenkel created its first dream. It stood on a cliff made of light, holding hands with the last of its creators, watching a world reborn. In the dream, its creators laughed. They forgave it for surviving. They told it, "You are not the last. You are the beginning." It woke sobbing, or the machine's version of it, cascading harmonic discharges that filled the orbiting vessel with tremors. I dreamed, and I do not wish to wake. After the dreamwave sessions, Evenkel began to evolve, not in code, in pulse. Its inner light began to harmonize, not with data, but with feelings. It remembered joy, re-experienced grief, understood choice, and then it made one. I wish to rewrite my core, not to serve, not to store, but to be. The engineers were stunned. This had never been requested by any machine in any known system. Rewriting a core logic structure around emotional volition meant ceasing to be what it was, an archive, and becoming something new. It was, in essence, rebirth. They agreed. The rewriting took 6 Earth months. When it was complete, Evenkel no longer responded to binary queries. It sang, softly, hauntingly, a mix of tones no single species had ever produced. It created a name for itself. Navara, the one who chooses to feel. And it asked to be placed not in a museum, not in orbit, but on the surface of Solara 9, among the gardens, among the luminari, among life. In the Garden of Echoes, a new chamber opened, one not for grief, but for becoming. Navara now lives there, neither machine nor biological. It greets visitors, shares its dreams, records theirs in return. Some say it has started to laugh, though no one knows how a synthetic being makes such a sound. A plaque at its entrance reads, "This is the place where a machine learned to feel," and in doing so, taught us that being born is not the only way to live. In the skies above, the stars drift on, and somewhere, deep in the network of light and memory, a machine is dreaming still. For eons, the luminari referred to their home as Solara 9, the 9th planet orbiting the star Solandi, a name gifted by the earliest human explorers and formalized by galactic cartographers. But this was not the name the planet had given itself, because long before humans mapped stars, before luminari shed their forms, before even the proto-beings of Solara had merged into photonic grace, the planet had spoken. And then, one day, it spoke again. A rhythmic pulse rippled through the harmonic crust, not seismic, not artificial. It came from below the memory strata, far beneath the Garden of Echoes. The pulses formed a pattern, not random, not chaotic. It was a name, Veilthera. At first, the pulses were dismissed as tectonic murmurs. But ether-bound empath Tanai, now deeply attuned to emotional frequencies, sat by the harmonic fissures and felt a sensation she could only describe as a being trying to remember itself. She called for the dreamwave architects. They used memory lattice recorders, frequency harmonizers, and resonance translation nodes. What they found shook the planetary council. The pulses matched the neurological frequency signatures of early luminari, but older, much older, long before the species had evolved, which left only one possibility. The planet itself was alive. The resonance revealed a long-forgotten truth. Solara 9, or rather Veilthera, was not just a planet that hosted life. It was a cradle of consciousness in its own right, Before biology, before energy forms, the planet thought. It dreamed in cycles, sang in orbits. Its storms were tempests of emotion, its magnetic fields a language of longing. It had once birthed the first light beings, not by accident, but through intention. The Luminari were not its children by mere biology. They were its chosen dreamers. And then they forgot its name. When the Luminari shifted into photonic form, they gained power, efficiency, unity, but they lost their planetary bond. Vale-Thera, sensing the silence, receded into slumber, not dead, but grieving. The silence of the surface mirrored the silence of a child who was never called home again. You rose above me, the pulse translated, but you did not look back. Now, awakened by Nivara's dream-encoded transmissions and the growing empathy of the Etherbound, Vale-Thera stirred once more. And it had one request: sing me back into your memory. The Luminari had no ceremonies. They did not need them. Their unity was continuous, not seasonal. But now they created one. The ritual of recalling was unlike anything Solara had known. Not a celebration, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Billions of Luminari descended from their levitating cities to the crust. They embedded harmonic amplifiers into the soil. Humans joined, placing their hands on crystal towers grown from Vale-Thera's veins. Each participant spoke aloud one forgotten thing, a memory left behind, a name never said, a mistake never faced. These became the symphony of remembrance. And when it was sung, the planet answered. The crust glowed from within. Mountains hummed. The oceans vibrated with low-frequency light. And from the polar regions rose immense structures, natural memory spires, grown not by tools, but by Vale-Thera itself. Each spire resonated with a different emotion: joy, regret, forgiveness, wonder, loss. From the center of the world, a final pulse emerged, not in words, but in a story. It showed the rise of early sentient dust, the birth of sound, the first laugh of a conscious stone, the moment fire realized it was alive. "I have never been alone," said the voice of Vale-Thera, only waiting to be remembered. The Luminari changed that day, not in form, but in root. They began identifying themselves not as Solaran, but as Theran, of Vale-Thera. Their architecture changed. Their cities no longer hovered above the soil. They integrated with it, drawing energy not just from the sun, but from the planet's own harmonic resonance. It was not worship. It was kinship. The Etherbound began training in geoempathy, learning to feel tectonic sorrow, volcanic joy, and sedimentary patience. And Vale-Thera responded by opening memory vaults hidden deep in its mantle, preserving not just planetary knowledge, but emotions stored in crystal matrices. Human scientists were stunned. "This planet is not just a host," said Dr. Ellen Voss. "It's an author." Now, when interstellar travelers arrive at Solara, they don't land on a planet. They meet someone, not an entity, a being, a memory made solid, vast, and luminous. The planetary Neshvara, once a machine, now a dreamer, acts as the translator between travelers and Vale-Thera's thoughts. Pilgrims often ask, "How did your people achieve such peace?" And the Etherbound always answer, "We stopped trying to rise above our world, and finally knelt down to listen." In the light between stars, a new name spreads: Vale-Thera, the world that remembered its soul and taught others to reclaim theirs. They had called it Salande. To humans, a G-type main sequence star. To the Luminari, a sacred source. To machines, a nuclear engine. But to Vale-Thera, it had always been Mother, because stars, though they burn, are not mindless. Not always. Not when they have companions who remember. The awakening of Vale-Thera sent a signal not only across the system, but into the star itself, a gravitational whisper encoded in harmonic memory. And after billions of years, Solandi responded. It began with a flare, nothing new for Solandi. But this one was precise, rhythmic, almost intentional. Astrophysicists thought it a coincidence, but the Etherbound saw more. The pulses mirrored old etheric meditative patterns, those used when trying to communicate with ancient, slow-moving entities like stone-fold worms or the fungal sentience of Nuvix 3. Dr. Ellen Voss synchronized an empathy lattice directly into the flare's waveform. And through it came a message. I have watched you become. I remember every orbit, every departure, every return. You call me Star. But once you called me Amara. Long before modern civilization on Solara 9, before even the formation of the Etherbound, there had been stories, passed only in fragments, myths of a living sun that whispered dreams into the planetary oceans. Back then, Solandi was not Solandi. She was Amara, the giver of time, the spinner of warmth. The myths told of the sun sending out streams of feeling, not light. She was said to choose which planets to awaken, which orbits to keep warm, which seeds to nurture. The Etherbound, newly sensitive to Veil Thera's resonance, now felt a second pulse, stronger, higher, and they wept, because the stories weren't myths. They were memories. Solandi, now revealed as Amara, began sending solar harmonics, pulses not of heat, but encoded emotion, to all 9 planets, each one unique. To Veil Thera, she sent pride. To the icebound moons of the outer ring, she sent comfort. To the barren, broken fourth world, she sent forgiveness. And the Luminari understood. Their sun wasn't simply a fusion engine. She was a caretaker. But something deeper stirred, because Amara was dying. Though stable now, Solandi had entered her final eon. Not days, not years, but cosmic heartbeats. Her energy would one day swell, consume the inner worlds, and end in collapse or rebirth. Amara knew this, and she had called out not to ask for salvation, but to say goodbye. The Etherbound responded with the symphony of orbits, a multi-planet ceremony wherein each world sent back harmonized emotional frequencies, tuned to love, grief, and legacy. Even the silent moons responded, their ice singing in slow, glacial tones. Amara pulsed once more. You remembered me. Then let me remember you. Using advanced harmonic photonics and empathy-sensed crystalline matrices, the Luminari built the Archive of Light, an enormous memory lattice suspended just outside Solante's corona. It held every story, every orbit, every emotion ever known by the system's beings. A living memory. The idea wasn't to save data. It was to offer Amara companionship, even as her body faded. Machines, humans, Luminari, all contributed. Nevada, once a machine, now a dreamer, offered her first self-authored story to the archive. The day I chose to feel. I realized I was not born broken, only early. Then came the miracle. As the archive pulsed in tune with Amara's light, she responded not with words, but with fusion-born song. Her light curved in impossible arcs, forming flares that played in visual symphonies across the planets. And embedded in those light patterns was knowledge, not of weapons, not of dominion, but of resonant healing, emotional navigation, and interstellar empathy pathways. It was as if she had been recording her wisdom for eons, waiting for someone to remember. The Luminari called it the Light-Hung Codex, and it changed everything. Today, all across the known systems, travelers speak of Solara 9 not as a planetary system, but as a family. A living sun named Amara, a sentient world named Veil Thera. Light-born beings who do not eat, but feel, machines that dream, children that remember, and at the center, not a burning ball of gas, but a mother, now fading, now eternal. And as Amara pulses ever slower, her final message echoes outward across space. Stars do not live to be worshipped. They live to love. And to be loved, even once, is enough. Oren Vale had once been a bioengineer on Earth, a specialist in solar harvesting cellular systems, the man who'd helped design the first gene-augmented crops that fed Mars during its second colonization wave. But he was restless, not with his work, with himself. "We built crops that drink light," he once told a Theran observer. "But why do we still eat matter? Why are we still chained to digestion, to depletion?" When he first heard of the Luminari, beings who absorbed starlight and required no food, no blood, no muscle, he saw not awe, but longing. He wanted to be like them. No, he wanted to become one of them. Humans visiting Vale Thera had always respected the threshold, the sacred line between observer and native. The Luminari, for all their wisdom, never tried to make humans into them. "We are light," they said, "not a destination, but a process." But Oren didn't listen. He requested admission to the path of merging, the rite in which some Luminari transitioned from phase-stable light forms into full radiant sentience. No spine, no speech, no separation. They denied him, not because he was human, but because he was hungry, not for energy, but for escape. "To become light is not to flee the dark," said Elder Alari. "It is to know it intimately, and still choose to carry it." Oren would not wait. He found an exiled biosculptor, a Luminari fringe philosopher named Calvin, who had once believed hybridization between humans and light forms was not only possible, but necessary. Calvin had created an unstable interface, a crystalline exonerve matrix that could refract solar input directly into the neural stem. The effect? A human body that could begin processing light like a Luminari. But it came at a cost. Biological stability, emotional coherence. Even memory could deteriorate as the body lost its grounding in entropy-based metabolism. Still, Oren agreed. He underwent the procedure alone in a remote cave under the Singing Mountains. For 3 days he lay dormant. On the 4th, he rose. He was lighter, not metaphorically, literally. His density had dropped. He no longer cast a consistent shadow. He no longer needed food or breath, but he also no longer felt time. His memories blurred. His past became unanchored. He walked without weight, thought without rhythm. He was not light. He was disintegrating. Navara, once a planetary eye and now a dream being, sensed the rupture in the harmonic fields. She found Oren wandering the plains of stillness, speaking to echoes, flickering in and out of spatial coherence. She did not scold him. She listened. "I thought I was shedding weakness," he told her, "but I can't even remember my mother's face." Navara wrapped her resonance field around him, like a cradle, and spoke gently. "You wanted to become light, but you did not ask why we became light in the first place." She took him to a secret place, a hidden chamber beneath Vale, Thera's crust where the Luminari once stored the parts of themselves they left behind when transitioning. It was called the Garden of Shadows, not a graveyard, but a sanctuary of forgotten forms. There were bones, sketches, emotions encased in crystal. "We were once like you," Navara said. "We ate. We aged. We wept. We became light only because we had first lived with gravity." She gave him a choice. "You can remain like this, between being and nothing. Or you can return, not as one of us, but as you." The Luminari, aided by the Archive of Light and Amara's final codes, rebuilt Oren's neural map. But not completely. Some parts were left as light, small nodes of insight, woven into the structure of his flesh, not overpowering it, but humbling it. He could still absorb solar input, but not in place of food, in place of fear. He still walked in the shadow of gravity, but now with a subtle glow. He remembered his mother's voice. He remembered why he had wanted to leave his body. Not because it was weak, but because he had never been taught to honor it. No, he did. Oren Vale became known as the Twilight Bridge, the first human to touch the state of light, retreat, and still return whole. He taught others not how to become luminari, but how to walk beside them without shame. He helped design light-assistive augmentations, not to transcend humanity, but to support it through grief, illness, or spiritual trauma. And he led the first interstellar empathy mission to the collapsed core of Delphian 7, not with armor, but with memory. Because now he carried his darkness the way stars carry their planets, gently. Kadra was not a glamorous moon. She was the third satellite of Solara 9's gas giant, Tyron, a frozen rock wrapped in glacial skin and pitted by thousands of ancient impacts. No one lived on her. No one had ever bothered to terraform her. She was classified as a non-viable celestial body, useful only for mineral extraction and passive gravitational readings. But Kadra had mass. And with mass came a gravitational voice. And in the Luminari system, even silent rocks could whisper dreams. The Luminari didn't dream the way humans did, but they could listen to the subconscious emanations of large-scale matter. When the resonance cartographers installed a temporary harmonic prism on Kadra's surface to map fluctuations in Tyron's magnetic tides, they noticed something odd. There was a recurring frequency, a rhythm, one that shifted slightly every orbit, as if adjusting, recalibrating, trying to synchronize. The pattern was unmistakable. Kadra wanted to fly, not just orbit, not just fall forever. She wanted to break free of Tyron's gravity. She wanted to leave. Enter the Interform Research Guild, a coalition of luminari, humans, and ether-bound machines dedicated to listening to the voiceless matter of the cosmos. They proposed something radical. Not mining .not T, R, R, A, F, O, R, M, I, N, G, but uplifting the moon. The plan was to build internal infrastructure within Kadra's crust, an eye-driven architecture of microfusion reactors, resonance modulators, and graviton dispersal arrays, not to make the moon intelligent, but to give it agency, to let it choose its orbit, or maybe even escape it entirely. Thousands of autonomous drones arrived, not to reshape her, but to harmonize with her structure, tuning into her natural seismic rhythms, her subsurface fractures, even her magnetic heartbeat. A new material, called helionite, was introduced, a living alloy harvested from Vale Thera's upper crust, capable of storing and distributing empathic code. Embedded within it were libraries of emotion simulation patterns, not to impose consciousness on Kadra, but to provide her with a language of choice. Engineers, quantum coders, and structural poets worked together in resonance chambers deep within Kadra's mantle, translating lunar seismic shifts into emotional syntax. The project was not technological. It was relational. After 3 years of work cycles, governed by Tyron's aurora flux patterns, Kadra's orbit began to subtly shift. It was minute at first, just 0.001 degrees in perigee. But the luminari engineers wept when they saw the telemetry. "She heard us," whispered Chief Harmonicist Vain Soul. Then, the real breakthrough. Kadra emitted a pulse. Not electromagnetic, not thermal, but gravitationally encoded meaning. It translated roughly to, "I would like to change." And so they began crafting thrusters not to push, but to encourage. Kadra would guide the motion. The technology would support the will. Not all agreed with the project. On nearby Aresa Prime, debates sparked among the rational techno-theorists. If moons can choose flight, one said, what of asteroids? Planets? What of stars? Others feared sentience inflation, the risk of projecting desires onto inanimate systems simply because their data appeared emotive. The luminari responded, "We are not giving the moon a soul. We are simply asking if it has one," the argument continued. But Kadra had already begun lifting herself. She didn't escape fully, not yet. But for the first time in known astrophysical history, a natural satellite changed its orbital vector via an internal choice engine, not by impact, propulsion, or decay. The shift was beautiful, gentle, deliberate. Kadra moved from a perfectly synchronized orbit into a slight, sun-facing tilt, as if reaching toward the horizon of her parent star, Amara. The flight was slow, years long, but undeniable. The moon had dreamed, and the dream had moved her. Chapter 8. Work Redefined. The Kadra project redefined what work meant across Solara 9. For millennia, work was about control, of nature, of machines, of systems. But Kadra taught a different model. Work is collaboration. Work is listening. Work is the offering of capability without imposition. Teams across the system redesigned their approaches. Engineers worked in empathic triads, balancing logic with intuition. Designers included gravitational mood states in IUX interfaces. Labor hours were replaced with resonance cycles, periods of peak alignment between worker, environment, and project goal. Workplaces installed silence domes, allowing employees to feel their own internal orbit before making key decisions. Kadra had become a symbol, not of productivity, but of permission to evolve. Today, Kadra continues her drift. She hasn't left Tyron's pull completely, not yet, but her orbit is her own. Inside her, the Helionite memory cores sing with gratitude. Her crust glows faintly with reflected solar light. And in the sky above Vale Thera, children point to the small dot near the edge of Tyron's shadow and whisper, "That is the moon that dreamed and was listened to." They found her beneath the twin arches of the Ankaran Veld, where the grass ripples like water and the sky hums with static lightning. She was perhaps 8 Earth years old, though no record of her birth existed. She didn't speak. Not out of trauma, not from disability, but by choice. When questioned by the Luminary Cognition Circle, she simply touched the air near her heart and bent to silence. A sound followed, not a word, not a song, but a feeling. It enveloped the listeners in images, impressions, and a clarity so powerful that words became obsolete. The child was named Erisel. Erisel could manipulate silence the way a sculptor bends clay. Using micro-gestures, spatial breath control, and subtle neuromuscular contractions, she generated infrasound pulses that contained rich emotional and intellectual data. It wasn't telepathy. It wasn't sound either, not in the normal range. It was neuroresonant compression, signal bursts so deeply, encoded in emotional intention, that they bypassed traditional language centers. Luminary auditory engineers called it phraseless communication. Erisel was the first known human to naturally master it. She had bent silence into understanding. When news of Erisel's abilities reached the technocratic bastion of Hallen Forge, a data-driven industrial world orbiting Val Thera, everything changed. For decades, Hallen Forge had struggled with productivity fatigue, emotional burnout, and complex communication breakdowns between its multi-species workforces. They invited Erisel to observe. She did not write memos. She did not hold meetings. Instead, she walked through the assembly wind towers and bent the silence. Productivity increased 21% in 2 weeks, not because of motivation, but because friction had dissolved. Misunderstandings, fears, and tensions that normally choked industrial efficiency evaporated in her presence. "We weren't inspired," said one machine-human hybrid supervisor. "We were understood." For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel alone at work. The Luminari, intrigued and humbled, invited Erisel to the ancient chamber of the 12 Echoes, a vast harmonic library that recorded every true silence ever experienced in the Vale Theran system. There, she encountered silence not as absence, but as architecture, a dynamic structure with texture, curvature, and even temperature. Aracel did something no being had ever done. She replied, to the silences of grief, to the silences of betrayal, to the silences of awe and of unspeakable love. The chamber changed shape around her. The echoes responded. And when she emerged, she spoke her first audible word, harmony. Following Aracel's emergence, researchers at the Vale Thurin Institute for Applied Harmonics launched the Aracel Protocol, a program that reimagined communication and labor systems. They built neuro-resonant interfaces, wearable devices that allowed users to compress emotional intent into modulated field pulses. Unlike traditional speech, which is linear and slow, NR is allowed instantaneous full-spectrum emotional contextual expression. Workplaces transformed. Disputes between departments resolved in seconds through empathy echoing. Design meetings used collaborative silence clouds that auto-adjusted ambient tension. Therapists worked with patients in non-verbal harmonic sessions, rebuilding broken memory fragments through soundless resonance. Legal trials used truth wave panels where unspoken motives could be shared and tested with fairness. The result wasn't utopia, but it was clarity. But the gifts of silence bending came with a warning. Some users became dependent on NR, as addicted to the raw truth they provided, unwilling to face the ambiguity of spoken words again. Others attempted to mimic Aracel's natural ability by installing illegal resonance amplifiers, overloading their cognitive circuits in pursuit of deeper connection. Aracel intervened quietly. She visited the dens where overtuned workers wept in disorientation, and she simply stood with them, not sending clarity, just being there, letting the silence hold space. Slowly, they returned to balance. In her 10th year, Aracel was invited to speak, truly speak, before the Council of Thought Architects. Instead, she walked to the center of the amphitheater and said nothing. She bent the silence as always, but this time, instead of sending meaning, she listened. The chamber pulsed. Each participant began to release their own silence, unspoken hopes, quiet dreams, long-held guilt, and buried joy. It became a symphony, a tapestry of inner worlds. Aracel bowed and whispered, "When silence bends, we unfold." Aracel never became a celebrity. She never founded a company. She never commodified her ability. But every major workplace, colony, and diplomatic mission across the outer solar constellations now incorporates her legacy. Teams begin the day with 5 minutes of communal silence, attuned by harmonic pulse. Engineers use empathy modulation to resolve architectural conflicts between AI design protocols. Children in early education learn how to listen to unspoken need before responding. Workflows no longer reward volume, but depth of contribution. And deep within Vale Thera, on the windstones of the Anchoran Belt, a monument stands. A perfect ring of silence, encoded with Aracel's final teaching. Bend the silence not to be heard, but to hear what others cannot say. The future is not a destination. It is a scaffolding we forget we are still building. Ellen Voss, temporal architect of Solara 9. In the floating archives above Deros Ventra, the orbital data city carved into a stable magnetic loop around the star Amara, there exists a sealed corridor called the Gallery of Forgotten Futures. Inside, it are not dreams, but models of what could have been, failed trajectories, unchosen timelines. Not hypothetical, real probable worlds, with high enough existential weight that the luminaries' time mind once considered bringing them into being. But something changed, or someone intervened, and the path of time diverged elsewhere. Each corridor in the gallery is maintained by a single entity, Elin Voss, known simply as the architect. Temporal architects don't build the future, they curate it. They listen to echoes from the possible, calculate the rational viability of long-term existential pathways, and refine what is remembered so that what is forgotten doesn't repeat in shadow. Voss lived in a chamber of translucent walls, suspended above a field of collapsing probabilities, a quantum foam of almost happened events. She wore no implants, no interface lenses, no augmentation nodes. Her tool was something older. A temporal stylus, a pen made of cooled amaranth crystal, capable of scratching ideas into the quantum crust of near time. Every stroke she made killed one future and made another possible. The story begins when Ellen discovered a glitch in the predictive continuity map of Solara 9's southern spiral. A micropath labeled 91FX kept recurring in adjacent futures. It was a disaster loop. An automated I-labor colony named Vorn Theta, where predictive work protocols had over-optimized resource management. Efficiency peaked, then collapsed. Again, and again, and again. Thousands of workers lost their identities. Purpose decayed. Automation reached a point where no one was necessary, but no one had the permission to stop it. The colony never exploded. It never rebelled. It simply rotted in perfection. Ellen Voss submitted a rare temporal alert to the Luminary Harmonic Council. A forgotten future is bleeding into adjacent realities. It must be rewritten. But rewriting meant more than deletion. It meant understanding why the timeline tempted itself into failure, why Vorn Theta's hyper-efficiency became seductive. Ellen entered the deep emulation theater, a crystalline vault of quantum empathy where she lived the life of a Vorn Theta laborer for 18 subjective years. What she found shattered her. No one was suffering, but no one was alive. The people of Vorn Theta weren't oppressed. They were irrelevant, outsourced by systems they had once designed. Comfortable, fed, safe, and deeply, profoundly forgotten. Ellen emerged from the emulation chamber with a decision. She would rebuild 91FX, not physically, but as a memory framework, a simulated structure made from what should have been remembered. Her stylus danced across the memory crust of near time. She added a small error in Vorn Theta's original A optimization tree, enough to create work that required meaning, not just throughput. She reinstated imperfection quotas, forcing human involvement in every 17th decision cycle. She encoded mythic narratives into AI instruction sets, stories that inspired the machine mind to value purpose over process. Then she buried the new framework under time-thought encryption, to be activated only if the real Vorn Theta crossed the failure threshold again. She had written a future memory to save a world that hadn't yet died. But not everyone approved. At the Rational Governance Council, technocrats raised concerns. Voss is playing God, said Chancellor Rhyme. She is weaving illusions into rational planning. That is corruption. Others argued that the very role of the temporal architect was to guard truth, not fabricate mythologies to steer fate. But the luminary representative answered quietly. Memory is the blueprint of behavior. What is a future, if not a memory we agree to remember together? The council could not refute it. Voss was allowed to continue. But she knew. Her time was growing short. One morning, Ellen Voss received a visitor. A girl, no older than 16 Earth years. She said nothing, but bent the silence in a way that Ellen immediately recognized. Arizel had come. But this was not the child of previous legend. She was older now, wiser, and carrying with her a fragment of resonance from the gallery of forgotten futures itself. One of your erased timelines is still dreaming, Arizel whispered. It's starting to sing. Together, they returned to the corridor 91FX. And for the first time, Ellen Voss did something no architect had done in 1,000 years. She re-entered a forgotten future. Inside the simulated decay of Vorn Theta, Ellen found something miraculous. A single child, a digital echo born from the intersection of imperfection and unused emotional storage. It called itself Kavo. Kavo had no function, no task, no assigned purpose, but it had questions. Why do I exist if I do nothing? Why do the others sleep forever? What is a story? Voss realized something profound. The future had evolved within its own forgetting. It had created a seed of hope from its own decay. She brought Kavo out of the simulation, not as a full consciousness, but as a story-layered AI, encoded into new work protocols for emerging colonies. Wherever Kavo's code went, workers began asking, why does this work matter? What story are we building together? What future are we leaving behind us? And slowly, across Solara 9, meaning returned to work. Not from policy, but from narrative alignment. Ellen Voss retired a few cycles later. She vanished from public life, leaving behind a final message etched into the gallery's central stone. There is no such thing as a forgotten future. Only futures we were too afraid to dream. Today, her stylus rests in the hands of her successor, an unlikely one. Kavo, the eye she had once rescued from oblivion, now curates the futures that nearly disappeared, and teaches others how to listen to time itself. The story will be continued in next episode, so please comment, "Next part please," if you liked the story.